Brothers, welcome back to Dummy Nation. Now, I often get questions about what does this do? What does this mean? How do I do this? What does this affect my total economy? Dummy Nation is a great game, but it does lack a lot of tooltips to tell you exactly what things are for. So I'm going to make this video to try and explain things. And as the current record holder for multiple countries, as well as defeating the world as Vatican City, the hardest nation in the game, I do have some experience. But if you feel like I missed anything, feel free to put it in the comments down below. Now, one of the questions I get a lot is how do I play a custom scenario? It's here on the first page, so we'll go to custom and we'll go to load. Now you can see I currently have 3 scenarios already loaded, but if I didn't have those, I would go to this button here to download the current available mods in the game, the scenarios, if you will. So let's say I wanted to play the world in 1444. I would click this button right here to download it. And then it's in my download. So I go back and there you can see 1444. I would hit load. And this loads up a bunch of different countries that exist in 1444. You can see that there's nothing over here in the United States and so forth. There's the Ming Empire and Siberia. So it's just a different fun experience you can try out on your own. But the focus of today is going to be on single player. So let's go ahead and jump into that. Now, for today's example, I'm going to be playing as Brazil, just to kind of give you the lowdown. It doesn't really matter. Most of this information will be good for smaller or bigger countries, and I'll explain the difference between the two. Now, right away, there's a lot to look at, and we're going to break everything down step by step, and there'll be time codes at the bottom, so if you want to skip around, feel free to. The first thing we're going to start off with is our budget. Now, you can see this is the amount of money that we make in a single year, and this is the current amount of money that we hold. Now, our budget is split into 4 different factors: social spending, R&D, military spending, and liquidity. Social spending affects your country's population. Now, why population is important is number 1, you have more workers who are able to make more goods and thus improve the economy. And number 2, the higher your population, the higher your GDP per capita is. Why it's important to have this number high instead of low is because if this number is higher, it means that it's cheaper to produce things in your own country. If you're in the United States, then it's going to be more expensive to produce something than it would be in Brazil. Social spending is a long game. It takes a lot of time to build up a population. The effects of this, obviously, you have to have children who have children who have children. So that takes a little bit of time, and it is a long game slider. At the beginning of the game, typically I like to keep this around 20% no matter what country I typically play. R&D spending is how much of your budget are you allocating to future research. This is a very important thing to have, especially at the beginning of the game, unless you're playing as a giant superpower like the United States, who already has a lot of things unlocked. I like to keep this around 6 or 7 or 8%. Military spending is not how many troops you're deploying in the field, but how well stocked they are. So think how much ammunition they have, are their guns new or old, those things increases the effectiveness of how well they fight. It is not an important thing to have cranked up right away unless you're playing as, let's say, like a small country like Bhutan, where the first thing you're going to do is attack. If I was playing as Bhutan, I'd probably crank this up a little bit higher, but since I was playing as, if in this scenario I'm playing as Brazil, I'd probably keep it around 5%. Now, your liquidity fund is how much of your economy are you, the government, keeping. It is important to keep money from your economy, because this is the money you spend on manufacturing more troops, getting alliances, getting peace treaties, and getting non-aggression pacts and things like that. If you're playing as an established country, someone probably in the top 20 of GDP, you can keep this a little bit lower. But if you're playing as a small country who's going to have to fight right away, it is worthwhile having this a little bit higher. Typically, I like to keep this around here and have my growth somewhere around 3%. That is kind of where you want it to be. Now, your total expenditure is how much of your country's spending are you then pumping back into the economy. So you can see we are spending 46% of what our economy makes, and the rest we're pumping back into our economy for future growth. Lastly is our exchange rate. How valuable is our currency on the global stage? This is based off your diplomacy and how many friends you have. And if you're friends with the United States, who is a big economic power, your exchange rate is going to go higher. It just means that you have more money. It goes into your expenditures more. It goes in your economy more. So having this number up high is really good. 80% is an amazing number. If you take a look and we go down this slider over here to diplomacy, we click on Brazil. You can see that we have some friends. This dark blue is our allies. The green are people we're on good terms with, and the yellow are people that we're not so much. If they're red, it means you're at war. Another way to check this out is to go to diplomacy, And you can see everybody above 75, we have an alliance with. So we currently have an alliance with Senegal, Colombia, Benin, United States, Haiti, Peru, and Vatican City. But we'll come back to this in a little bit, and we'll talk about when we're attacking, what do we want to look for in this diplomacy screen. Now we're going to skip these two right now, and then we're going to go straight over here into ideology. And we're going to talk about the 5 different ideologies in the game. Democracy. So currently we are a democracy. You can see this symbol matches this symbol. It means we're a democracy. Democracy is strong on 2 fronts, and you can use these 2 sliders that will affect this slider down here. Liberator is really good if you're already a democracy with a high score. It promotes a libertarian rhetoric, causing sentiment of the oppressed people in a foreign country to embrace your intervention, decreasing possible militia groups forming to oppose you. We'll talk about what a militia group is here in a little bit, but know that having less militias is very important. Down here, military service, also really good if you think you're going to get attacked because it trains your civilian population to withstand invaders, so you'll get free military troops to kind of fight against invaders. Now, these 2 funnel into democratic solidarity. What this means is if we attack a country that's not a democracy, other democracies will like it. For example, let's say Angola, who is not a democracy and has a very bad political freedom score, other democracies will like us more. We can get alliances from these democracies for cheap. It's a great way to win over a lot of the democracies over here in Europe who are notoriously sticky and hard to fight down. Now, the negatives of democracy is it is incredibly expensive. It ruins your economy and also increases the dependency you have on other economies. So if we went to war with, let's say, India, and then the United States doesn't like that, they're no longer our allies, that means that our economy is going to feel a tremendous weight and loss by losing that alliance with the United States. Personally, I don't really like to run democracy that much, especially in the beginning. Now, autocracy is a very strong one to start off the game with. Paramilitary is not that great, to be honest with you. It reduces the maintenance cost of your army by up to 80%, which sounds like it's going to be amazing, but you're going to be constantly replenishing your army and sending new troops out into the field. That keeping their maintenance cost is low is honestly not that great. And by the time that maintenance cost is actually going to be a concern, you are going to be big enough to just be mowing through people regardless. So it's not that important. When I start as an autocracy, I like to keep it about 8% to just say have a little bit. And then we put most of our points into martial law. Martial law is the best one. Enforce strict control and order, reducing the likelihood of raising any kind of militia opposing your country by 65%. This is an amazing perk, especially if you are a small country. I highly recommend going into martial law. But the one negative about martial law is our corruption. So by having martial law say, hey, we have a 46% chance less to spawn a rebel or a militia in a country that we're fighting, we now have corruption, which means our armor is weakened, our attack power, piercing is weakened, and it costs us a little bit of money. We lose money through corruption. Communism is another kind of subpar ideology, in my opinion. The biggest one is call to arms, which will effectively mobilize military resources, reducing training time by up to 100%. Training time is never really that big of a deal. Typically, you want to plan out your next moves and be ready for the next step. So you never really need to reduce the training times by that much unless you're kind of on the back heel. Now, planned economy is another one that seems like it'd be good, but honestly isn't that great. It increases budget spending limits by up to 20%, which sounds like, oh, okay, I'm getting extra 20%. What that really means, though, is we go back to our annual budget. If we crank up military all the way, you can see that military budget can go up to 31%. Now, with that extra 20%, we can go up to 50%. But realistically, you never have any of your sliders up to 100%, so communism isn't that good in its current state. Bureaucracy is another honestly pretty weak one. This increases your population growth, but population growth really isn't ever your giant focus. It can be handled plenty with social spending and some research perks, so it's not that great to have traditionalism. And holy war increases the amount of militias that will spawn in defense of your country, but honestly is not that great. And both of these sliders negatively affect your research and your cash flow, so it is a pretty hard ideology to play with. It is not one of my favorites. Now, fascism. Fascism is a lot of fun. It is so much fun. And the game knows this and it nerfs you. But fascism is great because of blitzkrieg. It reduces the time it takes for you to conquer enemy territory by up to 150% and also increases your speed. as well as exploitation, which means it drastically reduces the cost of training your troops by up to 50%. It is a fantastic thing to have. Now, the problem with these two and why the game nerfs your FUD is it ruins your economic score. If you're full fascist and if you want to get an alliance with somebody, you'll get that alliance and they'll immediately break. You can't have allies as fascists. More people are more likely to attack you. So it is not something to do in the beginning of the game. But when you're in the late stage of the game, and most people don't like you anyways, it's definitely worth switching over to fascism and utilizing that. Now, moving over to this tab, this is your troop recruitment page. Now, if you want to see the current troops that you have, you go down to this button right here where it says troops. So you can currently see that we have 714k commandos, 260k gunners, 5,000 tanks, and 1,000 rockets and 0 planes. We'll talk about planes here in a little bit. Now, commandos are really good about decimating unarmored opposition. So what that means is they're really good at fighting other commandos and gunners as well as militias that pop up. But if they go face to face with a tank, good luck, they're probably going to lose. Now, to talk about the stats of a commando, this is your general attack stats. So you can see this is the same down here. This is how well your army is going to do in an attack. This is your defense. So this is our defense down here. This is our piercing. Piercing comes from gunners and rocket artillery. It basically is how good are you attacking armored units. And then this down here, this lightning bolt, is how fast you move. Honestly, probably the least concerning thing of them all. So gunners are really good with piercing and attack, but they don't have any defense. And the same goes with the commandos. Commandos have a little bit more defense, but honestly, not that great. Tanks are really good at fighting commandos and gunners on flat ground. But if we go over here to terrain, and if we want to fight, let's say a country that has a lot of gunners, like let's say we're going against a unit that has a similar amount of firepower to us, but they're in the mountains and most of our armies in tanks, there's a good chance we're going to lose that fight. So tanks are very good at fighting unarmored opposition, but mostly in flat terrain. You can see flat terrain over here. And you can see the terrain pops up like right here. This is 27% terrain. Next up is rocket artillery. Rocket artillery is basically a hard counter to tanks. And then planes basically counters everything, but it's incredibly expensive. And most runs, I don't even use them. Currently, they are locked. You do have to unlock planes with research, which we'll get to here in a little bit. And by a little bit, I mean now. So research is split into 3 separate tiers: military research, economic research, and social research. Military research does exactly what you think it does. It increases how well you are good at fighting. So we'll go through each of them and I'll explain how it works. Now you'll see that some of them are grayed out and they have a 5K, a 20K, and a 30K, 50K, and so forth. That means we have to spend some of our research to unlock it. It is currently locked. We have not spent enough research to be able to unlock it. First up is combat training. It increases the effective capabilities of your infantry troops, which is again, your commandos and your gunners. I like pumping this one up in the beginning of the game and increasing their firepower and their piercing damage by 7%. And when we unpause the game for a day, now you can see that we have reactive armor unlocked. Reactive armor is how well are the defense capabilities of our armored vehicles by up to 20%. This is another very important one because tanks and rockets are incredibly expensive. And they'll only get more expensive as the game goes on. Everything will get more expensive as the game goes on. So losing tanks and rockets at the beginning can be very detrimental to your chances of winning in the late stages of the game. But typically I like to throw in another 2 points here. Next up is aerodynamics. This is how you unlock planes. And this slider will decrease the cost and increase the speed of which they move. Again, I typically don't use planes, so this one is kind of useless. I feel like you can more effectively invest those in tanks and commandos than anything else, but it is always an option. Next up is National Guard. Decrease the maintenance cost of your infantry troops by up to 50%, which is again your commandos and your gunners. Not the most beneficial thing unless you're going full military and you're really kind of budget cramped, but there's other things you can do, adjust sliders that can take care of this. This isn't a really good one to invest in. Next up is guerrilla warfare. Increases the offensive capabilities of your militia by up to 50%. But again, we'll talk about militia here in a little bit when we get into some movement. Next up, war tactics basically increases the capabilities of your troops by 20%, and nuclear weapons. What a nuclear weapon will do is if we go down to this slide and we hit economy, where the bright spots are is where we're making the most money. That's where our economy is. What a nuclear bomb will do is say, hey, this green dot over here, let's say we wanted to drop one here. This green dot over here, we're going to make it go away. So it ruins the economy of a country you could be invading, but it is very expensive. So unless you're specifically doing a playthrough where you want to be nuking people constantly, honestly, I don't think it's that much worth it to invest too heavily in any one research tree. Next up is economic research. You can see that this will cheapen the economic research of every future economic research that we do. And this is available in each one of these tabs: military, social, and economic. I typically don't like to put one into military research to cheapen up that research because I don't typically use it beyond these two factors right here. But economic research is going to be your bread and butter in most games. You want to improve your economy as fast as possible, and we're going to be investing a lot of points in here, so we do want to decrease the cost. Now, up to 50%, we're going to be decreasing it by 18%. Now, another important factor is that this will have diminishing returns the more you spend on it. So you can see each time we want to spend a level to get economic research in this example, the cost will go up by 10. Now, in return, we get 18% discount on the research. Second level, 32, still pretty good. Third level, only 42. You can see the diminishing returns happening, and we're spending still 10K research, which takes a while to accumulate. So it's never really worth it to spend all of your research to get a full amount in a tree, but economic research, 10% discount, totally worth it. Now let's go down the line and explain to you what these do and which ones do I prefer. Self-sufficient economy reduces the dependency of your economy on foreign relations by up to 50%. So what this means is if we have dependency on another country by up to 50%, that means we have to keep allied with them. If we lose that alliance, it hurts our economy even more. But having it does increase our economy. So self-sufficient economy gets rid of that, so we don't have that dependency on foreign relations as much. It is a very nice thing to have. Digital economy does kind of the opposite. It intensifies how much your dependency is on other relations, but also increases your economic exchange rate by up to 30%. We'll go back here and we'll briefly talk about the economic exchange rate. This is basically saying how much is your currency worth on the global stage. But like we mentioned earlier, if you go to war with somebody that the United States doesn't like and you lose that, that can be really painful for you. That does get countered by self-sufficient economy, so these two kind of counteract each other. Now, smart taxation improves the effect that your expenditure has on your economic growth by 20%. So the expenditure is down here. So basically it's improving this number right here, which is saying how much are you growing your economy in the long game. It's a very good one to have. Remittance improves your economic growth and your positive diplomatic exchanges, but reduces population growth. And we remember population growth is good for our long-term economy, but that does get countered by welfare state, which improves the effect social spending has, which is again over here, on your population by up to 35%. These last two, typically I don't use them a lot either. War economy just decreases maintenance cost of your troops. Maintenance cost, again, never a big issue. And economic stimulus. Economic stimulus is kind of the antithesis of a nuclear bomb, where there's a yellow dot. If you wanted to use a nuclear bomb, yellow dot goes away. Economic stimulus basically adds a yellow dot, gives you a little bit of economy. If you want to play a long game, a pure economic game, then you would use it, but typically I never use these two. Now, in order of which ones do I use personally, I will wait to get up my smart taxation. I'll put 3 levels into smart taxation, and then I will, depending on my relations, go down 2 levels of digital economy, 3 levels of self-sufficient economy, and then start working down welfare state and then remittance. And then I'm done with the economic tree. Again, this is where I put most of my economic research, so I will use all of these in their pure form to buff up our economy. Social research. This is one that people sleep on a lot because it's not as sexy as, getting your economy up or getting your military up, but the benefits can be truly, really good for you. First off is international aid. Eases the negative spread effect of all your diplomatic interactions by up to 30%. What does that mean? Essentially, people won't be as mad at you if you go to war with somebody that they potentially liked. So remember how we talked about if you have an intensified diplomatic relations for your economy, you don't want to lose those alliances. Well, this is a great way to keep those. It's also a great way if you're starting out in Europe. Let's say if we were starting out as Switzerland. Switzerland is not a part of the EU or NATO. But if we go over here, you can see Germany is. And they've got a lot of friends. Well, if I want to attack any of these guys to be able to get out, I need to attack one of these guys. And if I have a little bit of points in international aid, people won't mind as much if I attack a Germany or a France. Now, this is probably the best perk in the game. Moral high ground. Reduces the monetary cost of your diplomatic actions by up to 200%. So what that means is if, let's say, I go to war with Spain and France immediately attacks me. Well, I can go over here into actions and there'll appear a peace treaty. I can click on that peace treaty and there'll be a price associated with that. And using moral high ground drastically reduces that cost. So let's say instead of a peace treaty that would cost 20 million, maybe now it only costs 1 million. So it's a lot easier way to get them out of the fight and only fight the target you're trying to fight. Now, in all honesty, this is where I stop the social research tree, but we'll go ahead and explore the rest of them. Blind nationalism increases the chance of forming a militia group when your country's being invaded. I like to have the best defense be a good offense, so I don't get invaded that much, and if I do, I have an army strong enough to be able to defend myself. Innovative spirit increases your research points. You can produce up to 20%. It is good, but very expensive, so by the time you get to it, typically your research isn't a concern anyways. Nationalism boosts your population growth by up to 25%. We can deal with that in other ways. War propaganda, it's again, training time, not very effective. And urban planning designs and builds infrastructure necessary for the location in order to attract more population to the region. Again, one that you can do if you want to role play, but not very effective if you're looking to play the game a little bit more competitively. And lastly is this podium stance over here. Now this has a few important informations. It basically gives you a snapshot of how the rest of the world is doing. You can see Brazil, we're currently the 9th best GDP. We can also click on our country over here and see it in the overview. 9th best GDP. Our current growth is at 2.89%. Again, we mentioned we like to keep it around 3. That's what most of the computer does. And we want to make sure that we have a good eye on this, that we're not falling behind of any of our neighbors, and we want to be competitive on that front. But this is the most important bar right here, is the progress. If a country gets up to 100%, they will win the game. So why it's important to keep a eye on this is, let's say if the United States is at 70% and you have nowhere near the troops to fight the United States, or you're fighting a different war, you have to consider fighting the United States, otherwise they can win the game. Now, the last thing valuable on the screen is the political freedom. It lets you know which countries are a democracy and which ones are not. If the United States flips to a fascism, it might be worth looking in to see if they have any allies, and they might be a good target to attack, because the United States starts out with a ton of allies. They're allied to everyone in Europe, Brazil, ourselves, Mexico, Canada. But if they go fascist, they might lose a lot of these allies, and what was initially a bad target to attack might be a good target to attack. Now down here, you can see a snapshot of a country that we have clicked on. So currently we've clicked on Brazil, but if we wanted to see the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we can see this over here. In this screen is also the amount of troops that they have and their current firepower. It's always best to compare your firepower to theirs to make sure that you can attack them. So they currently have 3.54 million firepower. What is ours? Ours is 20 million. So that would be a pretty safe engagement. Typically in the beginning of the game, you want to look for weakened targets who have lost their military, let other countries like the United States do the big fighting, and look for a country who might be a little bit on the weak side. So let's say like a Mexico. Let's say Mexico dropped down to like 4 million. Well, Mexico is currently the 12th best GDP, so they would be a much better target for us than to go into, let's say, the DRC if they had comparable amounts of troops, because the DRC is the 86th best military power. So you want to be looking at these two numbers to pick your targets. Now, in the diplomacy tab, this is another great way to say who is going to attack me if I attack this country. Let's say, again, we want to attack the DRC. Well, anybody above 75 will come to their defense. You can see they don't have any relations above 75, so nobody would come to their defense. But if we click on the United States, you can see a lot of people would come to their defense, and we would have to either fight or buy off all of these people. Now, the rest of these tabs I'm going to kind of speed through. Claims is just going to let you know if they have a claim on a certain territory you might want to avoid. It's not honestly the most beneficial. Battles are never actually helpful. Budget can be helpful. If you say, hey, the United States is crushing me on economy, what are they doing? Well, you can see what their bars are in comparison to yours. So you could just match and say, hey, I want to do exactly what the United States does. Let's just copy their budget. Last thing I do want to point out, I forgot to bring this up, when you do your annual budget, you always have to hit apply. You cannot just hit OK for the budget to take effect. And lastly is bonuses. You can see the bonuses that they have. These are the bonuses in the research that we just talked about. So you can see they already have a level of self-sufficient economy, which we don't have, but would absolutely love to have. They have a couple levels of Liberator, Military Service, and Democratic Solidarity. It's not honestly the most important thing to see on the screen, but it can be helpful if you're struggling with fighting an army and you're kind of wondering why. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about with diplomacy is when you're allied with somebody, you can see that their icon down here is green, but if we click on Algeria, who we're not, it's gray. It's a nice way to see who's allied, and then their armies will be circled in green. If they're circled in red, that means you're at war with them. And the computer will never tell you when you lose an alliance. So you have to constantly be checking to see, is this green, is this green? Because if you don't, you could really be in a sore area. Now, let's talk about moving the military. So there are a bunch of buttons down here that seem really complicated, but you probably won't use a lot of them. The first button over here is a simple move order. So I'll just tell them to move over there. Now, a lot of times your military will take a really weird pathing. So let's say I wanted to go over to India. Well, we click this button. Let's go through India. Okay, so we're going over here and we're going through like 8 countries. That doesn't seem like the most effective route. It's much faster to go through the sea, right? Well, if you left click, hold, and then drag, you can draw a route that will be much faster. Now, the other danger you have to worry about by clicking this button is if you go through a country, they might not like that and declare war on you, and you will immediately spawn troops that will attack you. So it's always important to make sure that you're using this wisely. You're not going through countries you don't have an alliance with, and you mostly stick to the sea and draw your routes. The second button over here is the attack button. And we're going to use this right now to explain some other features. So let's say we want to attack Paraguay. Paraguay's got a military score of 2.5 million. Let's check their diplomacy. They have an alliance with the Vatican City in the United States. So we don't want to attack Paraguay. That would actually be pretty bad. Let's go over to Bolivia. Bolivia has an alliance with the Vatican City, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and that is it. Their troop count is 3 million, so that's honestly not that bad. Let's go over here and attack Bolivia. Now, when you attack a country, it'll do it in one giant blob, which does take a little bit of time, but is safer. You can split your army by using this slider right here and giving a new attack order, which will split your army. And that will move into 2 units. You can attack from 2 different angles. In contrast, you have this button, which will say split and go everywhere. This does move a lot faster. But the problem with this is when you come up against another army or a militia, you're more likely to lose troops. So it is a trade-off between speed and efficiency. This button right here is your defensive button. It basically says guard here, and if anybody attacks us, they'll just immediately go over and attack the person attacking you. This button is a patrol button. You can draw a line and say go in this circle, and they'll just constantly go in this circle. And this button is your go home button. So they'll go back to where our capital is. Now, if you want to select all of your armies, you can click this all army right here. But let's say I have 3 armies. We'll split these guys, move them over here. And I only want to select 2 of them. Well, you click the multiple tab, and then you select the 2 armies, and then you can give them a movement order with just those 2, but not the 3rd. Now, it is important to know that this is a toggle, so once you are done with it, turn it off. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly moving armies you didn't actually mean to. Well, let's go ahead and attack Bolivia here real quick. We'll group up all of our army. Okay, so let's attack Bolivia. We'll use our attack order. And I like to keep my army in one solid grouping until their army comes out to fight me. Now, another little important feature up here is this newspaper. This will tell you who's all declared war on you. Venezuela and Nicaragua have both declared war on us. So we have 2 options. We can either fight down Venezuela's army, or we can go over to actions and use a peace treaty. 24K, not that bad. Let's not fight Venezuela. And where was Nicaragua? All right, Nicaragua's over here. It says 663. This is actually less than $1. We're going to go ahead and say yes to that as well. And now we're just going to fight down the Bolivian army by themselves. Here they come over to attack me. And as we are attacking, you can see that militias will spawn up. If you leave a militia unchecked, they will grow over time and they will take back territory. They will also spawn more militia, so it's very important to take them out right away. So I'm going to take this army and say, go attack this militia over here. Now, if you see that we have red lines over here, that means there's more chance in our territory, the territory we captured, to spawn a militia. So there's a chance we could spawn a militia like right here. If you want to get rid of that, you can just tell an army to go stand directly on it. It's not going to be a big issue in Bolivia, but if we were to attack like a big country like the United States, where there's going to be a lot of pockets, then we're going to have to worry about that a lot. So if Bolivia was still existing, there could be some militias that would spawn here, but because we conquered them and they no longer exist, no more militias will spawn. Now, one thing we did forget to do in this example is spend our money. It's very important to spend your money on your troops right away because they'll be the cheapest at the beginning of the game. And let's talk about army composition. Army composition, the most important unit you want to have is commandos because they do fight down militias, and militias will absolutely wreck your troops if you don't have them. And they're also good about fighting down other militias, which is the most common unit in the game. I like to do 2 units of commandos, 1 unit of gunners, 1 unit of tanks, and then 1 unit of rocket artillery. So basically, we spend twice as much on commandos that we do on gunners, and then we move into tanks and artillery. I don't, again, unlock rockets. They're not that important. Now, if you're wanting to fight down an army, if you're wanting to fight down a country, it is also worthwhile to take a look at what they have. So you currently see that if we wanted to attack the Democratic Republic of the Congo, they don't have a lot of tanks. They only have 500. We have how many of these bad boys? We have 1,000 rockets. So if I was to set up this military, I would put in a full unit of commandos, half a unit of gunners, because they're honestly not that important at the beginning of the game. Probably, let's say, about this much of tanks, and then I'll throw the rest into rockets and have a nice balanced composition so that I'm ready for anything. But again, commandos are definitely going to be the most important thing that you have. Second after that is tanks. Now, the last important thing to look at is your defensive power over here in the top right. Your defensive power is saying how good your defense is, and it takes the strength of your army and all your allies' armies. So you can see that we have a defensive power of 237 million because we are allied with the United States. But if we go over here to Bhutan, their defensive power is 1.5 million because they don't have any alliances. The best way to increase the score is to get alliances, and how you get alliances is by increasing your economic and military prowess. So if you start off as Bhutan, you won't immediately be able to get an alliance with a China or a Russia or anything like that. But after you get your military, it's much more likely that you'll be able to afford it. The best ally to get if you're starting as a small country is Russia. They typically do fall in the mid game, but they are very strong defensive power in the beginning of the game. If we want to check out an alliance treaty with them, it's only 20,000 for us. So we can go ahead and get that, and we have an alliance treaty with Russia. And now our defensive power has gone up to 364 million. You typically won't be able to get an alliance treaty with the United States or China, but China is probably the most important one, especially in the mid game. You want to definitely get at least an alliance with the United States or China in the middle of the game. Otherwise, other countries are much more likely to attack you. Last thing we need to talk about is how to deal with being a small landlocked country. So every run is slightly different based off of how a country reacts and what they do. So sometimes you just have to get lucky. In this scenario, India doesn't have any troops and we're currently Bhutan. So what we have done in preparation for this is recruited a ton of gunners and a small unit of commandos, knowing that gunners are going to be able to move quickly and have a lot of piercing damage. So when we finish up these troops, we're going to use something that's been called the Vatican City strat, the Swiss cheese fact strat, but basically what it involves is declaring war on India, unpausing the game for 1 day, and then splitting our army into tiny little factors and moving them all around the area that we want to attack. Now, understand that you can't, as a small country, take over the entirety of, let's say, like in India, who typically spawns a lot of rebels. You can see the purple is their population. India is notorious for spawning a lot of rebels. It is the death of many empires at the beginning of the game. But you can see I just quickly move my troops around all over the areas that I want to attack, which is a small region of India. Get a good chunk of it. And once I've done this, I'll move it to full speed, unpause the game, and there you go. You have all your troops. You were able to blitzkrieg down, grab a bunch of land, and we're going to be able to repeat the strategy. And now we'll see if we can get an alliance with China. Still too expensive, but this is a repeatable strategy to do, especially as a small country. It is slightly cheesy, but it is the only way to win as a landlocked country. So there you go. There's the things you need to know to get started on your first domination victory. If you guys still have questions, put it down in the comments down below. If I get enough and enough people are interested, I might do a follow-up to this, maybe with some advanced tips and tricks. But thank you guys so much for watching. As always, especially if you made this far in the video. If you have made this far in the video, hey, give a thumbs up. Really helps out a lot. If you're new around here, subscribe for more. I put videos every day. But boys, I will see you in the next one.